peoples of the worldwide federated internet. What's good? This is slightly weird, not having my face on camera and just doing this audio version, but kind of a good breakup of the monotony of recording a podcast. It can get kind of monotonous. So I'm going to read today from the book of Habakkuk. Believe we left off on verse 5 and 6. And I want to go over some things. So I'm just going to read over again from verse 1 down to verse 7 and then start kind of sharing some of my thoughts from there. All right, verse 1. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear, even cry unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save? Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slack, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass me about. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. My bad. Therefore, wrong judgment proceedeth. Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days, which ye shall not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment, their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Now that's a pretty, I don't know if bold statement is the right word, but that's definitely a pretty, what would have been considered at the time, outlandish statement. Remember all of the things I discussed when it comes to the Assyrian nation and just how debased, I guess is the proper word, that the Assyrians were as a people, how violent they were. This is what they thrived on. This is one of the reasons why Habakkuk lobs the complaint that he lobs. Like, how long will this violence proceed without being checked? How long will this violence go on and nothing happen to this nation? This is one of the things that Habakkuk was having problems with back and forth. So he's trying to, in his mind, reconcile the fact that he serves God and he's ready to worship, do his part, live right, etc. But that's not what he's seeing from the nations about him. And so Habakkuk has some complaints. And I mean, honestly, who wouldn't have complaints at that time? You serve God, and all of the nations round about you are doing whatever it is they want to do. And it seems like nothing is happening as a result. They just have free reign to run roughshod over all of the nations. Yeah, I think anybody that was in right standing with God at this point, that was doing what they were supposed to do, would have a problem with this. But Habakkuk definitely has a problem. So there was two words used in verse 7, terrible and dreadful. And I want to look at those two words, and I want to read some definitions because y'all know how I do. I'm a word guy. The word terrible is from the Latin root word terribilis, from terreo, which means to frighten. And the English definition, of course, is frightful, adapted to excite terror. And the next word is dreadful. That word is impressing great fear, terrible, formidable. And the thing is, like I said, the Assyrian nation at this time, I mean, these dudes they were the cream of the crop as far as violence, as far as terror, and as far as just being a menace to the nations about them were. They were the top of the top. I don't think it got too much worse than what the Assyrians were. At least this is what everybody thought. But how bad were the Chaldeans exactly? Well, in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 39, verse 5 through 9, we kind of get a glimpse into just how brutal the Chaldeans were. This is what some part of me thinks. Now, remember, the Chaldeans, Babylon was a proxy kingdom with a proxy king. Part of me thinks that at one point, the Chaldeans figured, if we're going to rebel against Assyria, we have to be as bad as they are as far as violence is concerned, or worse. We got to turn it up a notch. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think the Chaldeans matched the violence of the Assyrians, only they took it to the next level. Because in order to beat the Assyrians, of course, they had to be more vicious, more violent. They had to match the Assyrians' level of violence and take it one further. So in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 39, I'll go through verse 5 through 9. And this is after the rebellion of Zedekiah. Now remember, Zedekiah was actually placed in his position by Nebuchadnezzar after he took Jehoiakim. So he already had the warning from Jeremiah, look, place yourself under the yoke of King Nebuchadnezzar. This is directions straight from God. Don't try no funny business. You're not a hero. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, are God's hand of judgment. Just go ahead and submit. All right, so verse 5 through 9 of Jeremiah chapter 39. But the Chaldeans' army pursued after them and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho. And when they had taken him, they brought him to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, to Riblah in the land of Hamath, where he gave judgment upon him. Then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew the nobles of Judah. So he captures Zedekiah after Zedekiah tries to buck up against the system. Nah, I'm not going to submit under this yoke. I'm going to do what I want to do. So probably more than likely what was going on in the mind of Zedekiah. Of course, this is just some assumptions by me looking, historically, is that he was mindful of all of the victories of Israel before this point. And in his mind, what he was probably thinking is, we fought off many armies that were bigger than this, enemies that were more ferocious than this. I'm not submitting to the king of Babylon. Now, if he had let me rephrase that. If he had a modicum of common sense at this point, he'd have said, Jeremiah is pretty trustworthy, man of his word. His word has been proven correct. He's not been proven to be a false prophet. So maybe it would behoove me to just go ahead and listen to what Jeremiah is saying and not buck against this. But that's not what he does. He bucks against Jeremiah, and he pays a brutal price for that. In verse 6, it says, Then the king of Babylon slew the sons of Zedekiah in Riblah before his eyes, killed all his sons right before his eyes. Also, the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah, all his sons, all the nobles killed right before him. Moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes and bound him with chains to carry him to Babylon. And the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire and break down the walls of Jerusalem. This city is completely destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar takes everything. Then Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive into Babylon the remnant of the people that remained in the city, and those that fell away, that fell to him, with the rest of the people that remained. So everybody's carried off at this point. Now you got to think in your mind, remember what Habakkuk said, the prophecy about what was going to happen with the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans being who they were at this point, nobody would have really believed that, right? And then fast forward to what's happening right now. Maybe it's possible that one of the reasons Zedekiah rebelled is he had a hard time believing that this was actually the word that God sent through the prophet Jeremiah to give to him. He probably struggled with that, even though these kings aren't serving God at this point. The kings of Judah, he's definitely not what he should be for the kingdom of God's sake, that's for sure. Verse 8 of Habakkuk chapter 1. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. Again, these would have been things that to any onlooker at this time would have been unbelievable. Like if Habakkuk had been saying these things about the Assyrians, everyone would probably be like, yeah, I could definitely see that, because the Assyrians were brutal. They took over everything. This is who they were. But the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, their horses are going to be this. This is the people we're going to fear. I'm going to read another excerpt. Kind of goes along with what was said there in the book of Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 1. If thou wilt return, O Israel, saith the Lord. Now remember this. With all of this judgment, God also is providing at this point right here, an opportunity for these people to repent. Would they take advantage of that? Sadly, no. O Israel, saith the Lord, return unto me, and if thou wilt put away thine abominations out of my sight, then shalt thou not remove. God is letting them know, submit to me, put off your wickedness, and I will stay my hand of judgment. You think they would listen? Do we ever listen? Any of us, not just them, even now, do we ever listen? No, unfortunately, we don't. Normally, until the judgment is rendered, then we want to listen. We're just like toddlers. Verse 2, and thou shalt swear, the Lord liveth, in truth and in judgment and in righteousness, and the nations shall bless themselves in him, and in him shall they glory. For thus saith the Lord to the men of Judah and Jerusalem, break up your fallow ground, and sow not among thorns. Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, and take away the foreskins of your heart, ye men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like a fire and burn, that none can quench it because of the evil of your doings. It's interesting when God draws a distinction between a physical act or command and what it means, right? Talking about circumcision here. What does that circumcision represent? That circumcision represents the cutting away of the fleshly desires of the heart and the renewing of that heart toward the things for God. Verse 5, declare ye in Judah and publish in Jerusalem, and say, blow ye the trumpets in the land. cry, gather together and say, assemble yourselves. Let us go into the defenced cities. Set up the standard toward Zion. Retire, stay not, for I will bring evil from the north and a great destruction. The lion is come up from the thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. He's talking about the Chaldeans. He is gone forth from his place to make thy land desolate, and the cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant. For this, gird you up with sackcloth, lament, and howl, for the fierce anger of the Lord is not turned back from us. And it shall come to pass at that day, saith the Lord, that the heart of the king shall perish, and the heart of the princes and the priests shall be astonished, and the prophets shall wonder. Then said I, Ah, Lord God, surely thou hast greatly deceived this people in Jerusalem, saying, Ye shall have peace, whereas the sword reaches unto the soul. At that time shall it be said to his people and to Jerusalem, a dry wind of the high place in the wilderness toward the daughter of thy people, not to fan nor to cleanse. Even a full wind from those places shall come into me now. Also will I give sentence against them. Behold, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariots. This is the verse I wanted to get to, but I kind of wanted to give the full context. And his chariots shall be as a whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe unto us, for we are spoiled. God was letting them know that these Chaldeans are going to come up on you so fast. Their horses are going to be so swift, and this destruction is going to hit you faster than you could even prepare for. They were not ready for what was getting ready to happen. Okay, verse 9 of Habakkuk chapter 1. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. Now, if you remember anything about the Assyrians, they were violent. They were brutal. But to some degree, the Assyrians had a purpose for their violence. I'm not saying that the Babylonians didn't have a purpose for their violence, but their violence was more. The Babylonians were almost violent just for violence sake. That was more of the attitude of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. So this was a different kind of violence than the people of Israel were used to. They were used to, okay, these people, they want us to pay tribute, or they want us to have respect, or they want certain part of the land. And if we acquiesce, maybe we escape this violence. To some degree, the same was true with the Chaldeans, but the difference was the level of violence that the Chaldeans was bringing was astronomically a higher level of violence than what the Assyrians brought, and it caught everybody by storm, because this was this little kingdom, proxy kings, set up by the Assyrians. They put who they wanted in place and in power. Every now and again, the Babylonians would rebel, but they never mounted any kind of real, lasting effect. The Assyrians put the stamp on them, and now out of nowhere, here comes the Babylonians, and their level of violence, the Assyrians weren't even ready for. Just to show you just how crazy this was. And again, in Jeremiah chapter 25 and verse 9. I don't know if I wanted to read any verses after that, but just to show you again how the Babylonians turned up the level of violence. I mean, it was another level. Jeremiah 25:9. Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them and make them an astonishment and a hissing and and perpetual desolations. He is letting them know, the king of Babylon is my servant. I sent him, and this level of destruction and violence is not going to be what you're used to with the Assyrians. It's going to be worse. Now, they had to be thinking to themselves at that time, is it really possible for these dudes to be worse than what the Assyrians were? And yes, absolutely it was. And it's funny, every book that I read, every book that I go through, there's always something else that stands out about the book to me that requires a little more of my attention. And one of the things that stands out to me in this book is when you look at everything the way it happened, from Habakkuk going to God and saying, yo, how long are you going to allow these things to slide? And for God to come back to Habakkuk and let him know, yo, don't worry, I'm sending my servant Nebuchadnezzar. He coming. Nebuchadnezzar and his son Nebuchadnezzar, they coming. The Babylonians are coming. The Chaldeans are here, and they're going to wreak destruction you weren't even prepared for. But here's the thing that I've focused on. This destruction didn't come because of what was going on with just any nation. A lot of this destruction came because of what was going on with Israel. So what that makes me think is, I could easily get on my podcast every week and complain, oh, the world's doing this, the world's going this direction, people are doing this, nobody cares. The more and more I read, the more I'm learning. I don't really need to be focused on what's going on in the world as far as what people are doing, right? They're walking according to the prince of the power of the air. This is the same thing I did before I got saved. This is the same power that I was under. So I can't expect them to do any different. Here's where the difference comes in. What is expected of me as a believer is different. So versus complaining about everything I see out and about, what I need to concern myself with is, what am I doing to affect my immediate surrounding and thus affecting the world in a better way? We believers are the ones who have the ear of God. Right? If we have the ear of God, we have the attention of God. We're the ones that can boldly come before the throne of grace. Then who's to blame when things go wrong? Again, that's on us. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.